Today, we will go over some of the most evil people in more recent times. If you haven't seen part 1 yet, I'll leave in the link in the description down below so that you can go check that out. No pressure to watch them in any order though. Anyway, without any further delay, I present to you 2000 Years of Evil, part 2. The better one, in my opinion. First comes Leopold II of Belgium, who oversaw the atrocities committed in the Congo Free State from 1885 to 1908. Many factors during this time contributed to a significant decline in the Congo's population. Estimates range from 1 to 15 million deaths. King Leopold II personally ruled the Congo Free State, so he had full control of its resources like rubber and ivory. Due to the growing automobile and bicycle industry in the Western world, and ignoring the fact that slavery was illegal, the locals of the Congo were put to work collecting rubber and were forced to meet insane quotas or face severe punishment. Leopold put together a private army which had the task of keeping the workers in line. The soldiers were required to turn in one hand for every bullet that they used, because there was worry that bullets were being used for sport. This caused fights between villages in order to come up with enough hands. Villagers, dead or alive, would have their hands chopped off. Many types of atrocities continued for years under King Leopold II's direction. However, in 1904, there was public outrage after what was really happening in the Congo came to light. An international protest movement began, with famous writers like Arthur Conan Doyle and Mark Twain being some of the more prominent people to send out their condemnations. The king was finally forced to end his rule and hand over the Congo to the Belgian government. That brings us to the era of the World Wars and onward, a time of fascism, atom bombs, lots of weapons, and more fascism. There are a lot of people to cover from this time period, many of which are pretty well known, so I'll try to make it not take too long. Benito Mussolini, the Italian dictator during World War II, who forcefully took power in Italy. His army killed thousands, bombed the Red Cross, and much more. The Black Shirts, fascist Italy's paramilitary, under his leadership, issued cruel punishments on those who did not fall into line. One top method implemented for punishment was to tie someone to a tree and force them to eat a live frog, toad, or similar animal. Although less feared than the German SS because they rarely used their more lethal tactics, they managed to keep a solid rule in Italy. Hideki Tojo, Prime Minister of Japan during World War II. It would probably make more sense to say the Japanese military as a collective, but as a leader, much of the responsibility does fall on him. The Japanese army did some pretty cruel things in the Second World War and were the perpetrators of many crimes against humanity. Tojo authorized a pamphlet that forbade Japanese soldiers from being taken alive, which amped up the Japanese principle of there being no such option as surrender. I won't go too much into detail, but I do have a couple videos on World War II Japan that you can check out if you're interested. I'll put a card up in the corner and a link in the description. Next, Mao Zedong, the leader of the Chinese Communist Revolution. It is estimated that up to 65 million people died in Mao's attempts to create a new socialist China, from everything from execution to forced famine. From 1959 to 1961, the number of people that starved to death in Chinese villages was equal to the population of modern California, 30 to 40 million. Mao also enlarged the system of forced labor camps in his country. He supported a system infused with oppression that resulted in deaths due to everything from beatings to cannibalism. Which brings us to Nazi Germany. I suppose we might as well start at the top with Adolf Hitler, one of the most evil people of all time. He orchestrated not only the Holocaust, but the entire Second World War. He was responsible for the death and torture of about 2/3 of Europe's Jewish population. He was the leader responsible for the horror that occurred in Auschwitz and all of the other German concentration camps. He was the head of the Nazi Party and committed so many atrocities driven by racism, a hunger for power, and just plain insanity. Next, we have the Angel of Death himself, Josef Mengele. My friend Aiden the History Reporter will tell you all about what he did.
Josef Mengele is a Nazi physician. In Auschwitz, he is famous for conducting cruel experiments, mainly the twin experiment on Jewish or Roma twins. He is said to have had 1,500 pairs of twins for experiments, and only had 100 pairs survive. Before a surgical operation, he would gain trust in his patients by treating them well in terms of hygiene and treatment. Then after trust is gained, he would lead them into the operating table, and amnesia was not used, so all the victims/patients had to endure the pain. Mengele would remove certain organs, immersing people in with cold water, putting blue dye in patients' eyes, and he would also put gangrene in wounds. If one out of the pair died during an experiment, the other twin that was alive would be killed. If a patient died on the operating table, Mengele would gouge out the eyes of the patient and then send them to Karin Magnuson, who would try to artificially change the eye color.
Thanks, Aiden. Before we exit the realm of Nazi Germany, I would like to give a dishonorable mention to Heinrich Himmler, the head of the German SS, and Hermann Göring, the creator of the Gestapo. And finally, we reach Joseph Stalin, the ruler of the Soviet Union from 1927 to 1953. He used the Gulag, the Soviet system of forced labor camps and prisons, to their worst extent, primarily focusing them on gaining control of the public with fear. Over 1 million people died in the Gulag in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. He killed off 81 of the highest-ranking members in the Communist Party to rid himself of rivals, and took control of the land of millions of struggling families. But what happened to be the most deadly event that Stalin is responsible for was widespread famine caused by his policies toward industrialization. Famine in the Soviet Union due to this resulted in the deaths of millions upon millions upon millions of people. That brings us out of the World War II era and to Idi Amin, the brutal president of Uganda during the 1970s. In 1972, he banished all Asians from the country, which made the Ugandan economy fall apart. He publicly insulted many world leaders and the entire United States and United Kingdom. In 1976, he personally involved himself in the hijacking of a French airliner. He commanded the persecution of multiple ethnic groups, and during his presidency, an estimated 300,000 people were killed and many more tortured. Next, we have Pol Pot, the Marxist ruler of Cambodia, whose government ruled the nation from 1975 to 1979, a period in which up to 2 million people are estimated to have died. The dead were buried hundreds at a time in large graves that came to be known as killing fields. This was the result of disease, starvation, overworking, and executions from the forced field work that millions of citizens were forced to endure, or in many cases, not endure. His regime controlled everything about everyone's life. Private property, money, and most entertainment were outlawed, as people that used to have respectable jobs were forced to work and starve in rural fields for the re-education of society. And lastly, we have Saddam Hussein, president of Iraq from 1979 until 2003. In 1990, Iraq's army occupied Kuwait, supposedly with the intention of using its precious oil to boost the Iraqi economy. Hussein refused to withdraw the forces, even when the United Nations authorized the use of force to end the occupation, and a large US-led military group began to build up in Saudi Arabia. Eventually, this led to the Persian Gulf War, which ended with Iraq getting totally pummeled. In the aftermath of the war, Saddam Hussein found himself having to suppress rebellious uprisings in Iraq, which resulted in thousands being murdered and thousands having to flee north. The US and Great Britain declared that they would support efforts to remove Saddam and his brutal regime from power. Then, after the 9/11 attacks in 2001, Hussein would not cooperate with the weapons inspectors that had returned to his country. The US and Britain then announced an end to diplomacy with Iraq. In early 2003, US President George W. Bush ordered Saddam Hussein to step down and leave Iraq or face war. He refused and so faced war. Saddam ended up surrendering to American troops in December. Thank you all for watching. If you learned something, make sure to subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.